Welcome to Pine Tribe Author Interviews. I'm Philip Tramper, and I'm here with Matias Dalsgaard, author of Don't Despair, Letters to a Modern Man. We're just going to have a nice conversation with Matias today, and what I really think is unique about your background is that you started at McKinsey, right? And then all of a sudden you stopped working there and then pursued a PhD in philosophy. What was that process like? Why did you decide to change gears?
Well, maybe it would be more right actually to say that I started out in philosophy. Well, actually I started out in literature.
Oh, okay.
I wanted to be a writer originally when I was in my early 20s. And then I studied literature. Well, I was writing a lot these years, and I guess that's also why I'm still writing today, is that I have this practice of writing from my early 20s, where that was really what I was doing. I was reading and writing. It was literature, but then it developed more into philosophy, what I was reading, and therefore I also actually ended up taking my master's at the university in philosophy rather than literature. And then I decided to go into business after finishing my master's in philosophy. So that was actually like the first odd move, which I then repeated just in reverse. Afterwards, then going from McKinsey back to philosophy, and now of course I'm back in business, so to speak, again.
Because you've done your startup now. GoMore.
Exactly. But I think from sort of a perspective of life or of living, I always admired business people more than academics, like in terms of the kind of life you're leading, the level of activity, the kind of interaction with other people, the way that you create things, other than just quote unquote being an expert on something. And I actually think that also when I wanted to write in my early 20s, it was also the idea of creating beautiful books, beautiful poems. Now I'm maybe creating a beautiful company. We'll see, but it's a creation rather than the life of the expert that interests me. And as an academic, you are an expert in a field, and when you are in business, you rather build something with other people.
Do you think you had a sort of a better perspective on business because of your academic background and interests? Because it's not the traditional route to end up in McKinsey from philosophy, right?
That's true. I think, of course, there are some things in business that you really have to learn in business. And if you didn't go to business school, then you might learn it being with McKinsey, which is also very much of a business school environment. So I think it's very meaningful to really learn doing business from business people. And in that sense, I wouldn't say that you can just become a great businessman from studying philosophy, but that gives you something else. It gives you a broader perspective on things. I have a sense of language, a sense of tradition, a sense of culture that I rely on a lot. Also when I create business, because there you're actually creating something for people. You're speaking to people. You have to try to understand the world from their perspective. And I wouldn't say that philosophy is necessarily what you have to study to learn to do that, but it's just the more you know, the more sort of bandwidth you have as a person. And I always appreciate that in other people when I work with them, that they are of course very good at what they're doing, but also have sort of a broader perspective on things.
Your protagonist in your book, Osmos, he is a businessman of sorts, and he doesn't come from perhaps the same background as you do with the philosophy and all that. No, he's done the business route, traditional, this is the track, you're not diverging, this is where you're going. Why did you choose to write about that type of character then, instead of something maybe more based on your own past?
Well, I think for several reasons. When you create a character in a book, this is of course, in a way, always one-dimensional. So you have to choose a character to write about in order to make this person stand out as a clear, understandable, or identifiable character. So I think it's not right to say that I'm not that person. I'd rather say that this person is part of me. It's a certain version of me, and that's the business, the overambitious young businessman. That's part of me. And then I'd rather say that another part of me is then the priest.
Ah, okay.
Writing the letters to this young businessman who is actually in a sense lost.
Yeah.
I talked about you could maybe get lost in what you're doing if you don't have a broader perspective.
But what's really interesting is that you learn so much about Rasmus, the protagonist, the young businessman, but you never really hear from him because it's all written from Morten, who's the priest and his uncle. Why did you decide to write it in that format where it's like there's no one voice for Rasmus? It's all done through somebody else.
I've been asked that question before by other readers, and of course it's a good question because you might actually want to know or hear more about what does this person, Rasmus, the young business person, what does he think about his life? Yeah. You only hear what the priest thinks about Rasmus's life, so to speak. But it's because the book and the form that the book has serves a certain purpose, which is actually the purpose of speaking directly to this young character. Actually, I don't care what Rasmus thinks about his life. I know that he needs somebody or a voice that is speaking directly and hopefully in an upbuilding, both critical and upbuilding manner to him. There's a tendency today so that we only read like third person or books, theoretical books about literature, about psychology, about art, whatever, in a third person perspective. You know, we learn about for instance, psychology. You can study psychology and you can become very scientific about psychology, and science is always done in a third person perspective. You look at something and you describe it, and like this thing is outside.
Objective, unbiased.
Yeah. But no one ever speaks to you in the modern world. You only get that in the church, and nobody goes to church any longer. So this is actually, it's a book of modern sermons. I'll say. I mean, it's letters written from one person to another, but this person writing the letters, it's the priest. He is speaking to the young character as he would be speaking to the congregation in a sermon. You know, this is about you. Now I'm going to tell you about your life and what you're doing wrong, but hopefully also in a helpful manner. Of course, not in a negative way, but therefore it's really like, and I hope that's also the feeling you get when you read the book. You referred to it before. Is that, whoa, now I'm really put on the line here. You know, this is really to me. This book is directed to me. These letters are to me, and if you can create that sense in the reader, then the reader will suddenly take things much more seriously than if he or she was just reading about something objectified, you know, outside of him or herself.
What was great about this was, even though you could feel that there were the religious connotations and you were listening to a priest, it still wasn't preachy, and it wasn't overly religious. Like, I'm not an overly religious person myself, and I didn't feel like I was trying to be converted or anything, you know, in that sense. So why did you end up using the religious voice?
It's not a religious book. Let me just emphasize that. It's an existential book. It's one person speaking to another person at a personal and existential level. I wrote this kind of book because I always personally felt that there was so much to learn about life from reading the Christian thinkers, the Christian texts, the Christian tradition. I'm of course also, which is also clear in the book, drawing a lot on Kierkegaard, for instance, the Danish Christian and modern philosopher at the same time. He's an example of somebody who's really capable of writing from the tradition of Christianity, but to the modern person, speaking to the modern person in a very appealing way to the modern reader, and the modern reader will not see this as religious talk or text necessarily, but as something which really concerns him or herself in this present life, and wanted to bring this tradition in a way further, you know, building on Christianity, drawing on the existential insights of Christianity and the tradition also of just speaking to people, which Christianity nobody speaks to anybody any longer. as as also said before, we go to university, we study things, but in a very objective manner, not in a manner where the things are really supposed to speak to us as they are, like if you study theology. And therefore I think there's so much to learn from this tradition, and this can be very helpful both to the religious and the non-religious reader. If you were, as the author and the writer here, would you say that there's a specific person out there who these letters are meant for? Not just like, not, this person by name, but like this type of person, like who would this fit? I would say young, ambitious, well-educated professionals in general. It's like I think you need to be relatively both well-read, not within philosophy or literature, but in general that you are used to read books, and also that you're kind of reflexive, that you actually think about your life, but also that you are ambitious with your life, not because you necessarily have to be that in order to understand some of the messages in the book, but more because these people will find it easier to identify with the main character of the book, Rasmus, who receives the letters. I want to thank you so much for coming in with us today. Don't despair. If you want to learn more about this great book, check us out on pinetribe.com. There you can learn more about Matiass as well. And we've got a bunch of great articles and blogs available there as well. So thank you so much for joining us. Please subscribe to our channel and have a good one.